The rain fell over Calvary Cemetery in Queens like the sky itself was mourning. Sheets of cold water battered the rows of stone angels, drowned the wilted flowers on forgotten graves, and washed across the marble like silent tears no one would ever see. The afternoon sky was the color of lead, low and heavy, pressing down on the world as if grief had a weight measurable in pounds. In the middle of that gray storm, Lorenzo Vitale knelt on the soaked earth, the man the entire East Coast called Renzo, the man whose name made union bosses lower their voices in dim restaurants on Mulberry Street. The man feared in 5 boroughs and respected in 3 states, was on his knees in the mud like a broken peasant. His charcoal coat was soaked through. His dark hair clung to his forehead in heavy strands. Water ran down his sharp jaw and dripped from his chin onto the cold marble of the gravestone before him. Carved into that stone, in letters that still looked too fresh, too unreal, was a single name: Sofia Vitale, beloved daughter, 7 years young. In Renzo's hand, a bouquet of white roses had been crushed beyond recognition, the petals torn between his fingers, the thorns drawing blood he did not feel. 20 feet behind him, 2 of his most trusted bodyguards stood beneath black umbrellas, their heads bow on silence. They had served him for 9 years. They had never seen him cry, not once. They did not look up now. They knew better. Renzo reached into the inner pocket of his coat with a hand that did not tremble, but only because he refused to let it. He pulled out a small object wrapped carefully in a white silk handkerchief, a child's friendship bracelet, woven from pink and yellow embroidery thread, with a tiny silver charm in the shape of a star at the center. Sophia had made it herself the previous summer, sitting cross-legged on the marble floor of the old Westbury estate, her tongue poking out between her teeth in concentration. This bracelet was the only thing they had recovered from the wreckage on Interstate 495 3 weeks ago. The only thing left of her. A bracelet and a small scrap of a yellow cotton dress. Renzo pressed it to his lips. The rain mixed with something hot and salty on his face, but he refused to acknowledge it. "Daddy is here, princess," he whispered, his voice rough as broken glass. "Daddy is here." He bent forward and laid the bracelet at the base of the gravestone with the gentleness of a man defusing a bomb, and in that exact moment, something cold and electric ran down the length of his spine. Not grief, not love. Something older, something sharper. Renzo froze with his fingers still resting on the marble. His breathing slowed. The rain seemed to fade into a distant hum, and a single thought rose up from the deepest, oldest part of him, the part that had kept him alive in this business for 2 decades. Something was wrong. The explosion had been too clean, too convenient. The forensic team, men he had paid handsomely, had recovered no remains. No bone, no tooth, no DNA, only a bracelet and a torn piece of fabric, conveniently placed where searchers could not miss them. The driver, a loyal soldier of 15 years, had died on impact. He could no longer be questioned. And the schedule that day had been known to only 4 people in the world. Renzo lifted his head slowly. The rain ran down his face, but his eyes, those black, glittering eyes that had ended men in back alleys and boardrooms alike, no longer held tears. They held something far more dangerous: calculation. He thought of his wife, waiting for him back at the estate, with warm wine and a soft white robe, and the first stone of suspicion, the first cold and terrible stone, dropped into place inside his chest. The cold stone of suspicion did not stay still inside his chest. It moved. It rolled backward through time, 3 weeks exactly, and dragged Renzo's memory with it. The morning of the accident had begun ordinary in every way that mattered. Sunlight poured through the tall French windows of the breakfast room at Old Westbury. Sophia sat at the long oak table in a yellow cotton dress, swinging her bare feet because they did not yet reach the floor. She was eating strawberries one by one, dipping each in powdered sugar, leaving a faint white print on her lower lip. Her piano teacher in East Hampton was waiting for her at 10 o'clock, an hour and 40 minutes away by car. Isabella had insisted on driving her personally that day. The memory played in Renzo's mind now, frame by frame, sharper than it had any right to be. His wife had stood in the doorway in pearl earrings and a cream cashmere sweater, fastening a thin gold watch around her wrist. "Marco can drive us, my love. You focus on the meeting." She had smiled at Sophia and held out her hand. "Come, princess. Let's not be late for Mr. Albright." Renzo had been distracted that morning. The shipping container situation at Red Hook needed his personal attention. 3 of the longshoremen captains had requested an audience. His phone had not stopped vibrating. He had kissed his daughter on the top of her head, had inhaled the scent of strawberry shampoo, and had told her he loved her more than the ocean. That had been their private game since she was 3. He had not kissed his wife. He noticed that detail now, 3 weeks later, kneeling in the mud. He had not kissed Isabella goodbye that morning. He had simply nodded at her. The call had come at 11:17 in the morning, 63 minutes after they had pulled out of the driveway in the black armored Cadillac. Renzo had been in a back office at the port, a cigar burning in a glass ashtray, when his phone rang and the voice of a state trooper, a man on his payroll, broke into pieces on the other end of the line. A massive explosion on Interstate 495, eastbound, just past exit 70. The Cadillac, ripped apart. Marco, the driver, dead at the scene. Mrs. Vitale, alive. The little girl, gone. Renzo had not screamed. He had not broken anything. He had simply sat down very slowly in his leather chair and watched the cigar burn down to ash without lifting it once. 20 minutes later, he was in another car, his knuckles white on the door handle, racing the wrong way up the Long Island Expressway against 3 lanes of traffic. Isabella had come home that night soaked to the skin in rain that no one else had felt, because the storm had not reached Westbury until after midnight. He remembered that now, too. She had walked through the front door, dripping water onto the marble. Mascara streaked down her cheeks, sobbing so hard she could not form whole words. A paper coffee cup had still been in her left hand, half full, the coffee gone cold. She had told him the story between gasps. She had asked Marco to pull off at the rest stop on the parkway. She had run inside to use the restroom and to buy a cappuccino for Sophia, the one with extra foam the way the little girl liked it. She had been at the counter when she heard the blast. She had run outside and seen the fireball half a mile down the road. By the time she reached the wreckage on foot, there had been nothing left but black smoke and pieces of metal. Renzo had held her in his arms for 2 hours that night. He had believed every word. Now, kneeling on his daughter's grave, the rain finally washing the last of the fog from his mind, he saw it differently. Isabella had walked in soaking wet, yet the rain had not arrived for hours. Isabella had carried back a paper cup, yet there had been no receipt in any pocket, on any counter, in any record his men had later searched. And Isabella, his beautiful and devoted wife, had not borne a single scratch, a single bruise, a single mark on her perfect skin, from an explosion that had reduced 2,000 pounds of steel to confetti and turned a man into ash. The second stone dropped into place beside the first. The black Mercedes glided through the wrought iron gates of the old Westbury estate, just before 7 in the evening. Rain still fell, lighter now, drumming on the polished hood of the car like impatient fingers. The 2 bodyguards in the front seat said nothing. They had not spoken a single word during the entire drive back from Calvary. They had felt the change in the man behind them, and they were afraid. Renzo stepped out of the car onto the wet gravel of the circular driveway. He removed his soaked coat, handed it to the waiting butler without looking at him, and walked through the towering oak doors of the mansion with the same measured pace he used when entering a meeting where someone was about to die. Isabella was waiting at the foot of the grand staircase. She stood in the soft glow of the chandelier, dressed in a long ivory robe of cashmere and silk, her dark hair brushed loose over her shoulders. In one hand she held a heavy crystal glass of red wine, warmed exactly the way he liked it. Her brown eyes glistened with what looked, to anyone who did not know better, like grief and tender concern. "My love," she whispered. She crossed the floor in bare feet and reached up to cup his face with her free hand. Her palm was warm. Her thumb stroked his cheekbone with a tenderness so practiced it could have been choreographed. "You are freezing. Come, sit by the fire." Renzo allowed her to take his arm. He allowed her to guide him into the smaller library, where a fire was already crackling in the marble hearth and a second glass of wine waited on the low table. He sat in the leather wingback chair he had occupied for 10 years, and he watched. He watched the way her fingers curled around the neck of the bottle as she leaned forward to refill her own glass. There it was, a tremor, so small that 9 men out of 10 would have missed it entirely. The wine did not spill. The motion was almost perfect, but the tendons on the back of her hand had pulled tight for a quarter of a second longer than they should have. He watched her phone, lying face down on the corner of the side table beside the wine bottle. A black rectangle, screen pressed to wood. She had placed it there before he arrived. She had been waiting for a message. Her eyes flicked to it now, and then away, in less time than a heartbeat. But Renzo had built an empire on heartbeats. "You did not have to come back tonight, my love," she said softly, settling onto the ottoman near his feet. "You should rest. The men can handle the port." Renzo did not answer. He raised his glass to his lips and let the warm wine touch his tongue without drinking. A faint trace of something herbal and unfamiliar lingered on the rim. Probably nothing, possibly everything. The library door opened without a knock. Antonio Vitali walked in the way he always did, like the rooms of this house had been built for him as much as for his older cousin. Tony was 34 years old, lean as a boxer, dressed in a charcoal suit that had been tailored on Savile Row. He had a smile that women trusted and men envied, and he had been Renzo's right hand for nearly a decade. "Renzo," he said, his voice low and rough with feigned emotion. He crossed the room in 3 strides and placed a heavy hand on Renzo's shoulder. He squeezed once, hard, the gesture of a brother. "We will get through this together. You and me, like always." Renzo looked up into the eyes of the cousin he had grown up with on the streets of Bensonhurst. He nodded. He even managed something that resembled gratitude. But inside his head, a list was forming. A list as cold and precise as a butcher's bill. 4 people had known the schedule that morning. 4 people, and 4 people only. Marco, the driver, who had died in the explosion. The piano instructor in East Hampton, an elderly man with no connection to anyone. Isabella, his wife, and Tony, his blood. 2 of them were still breathing, and both of them were standing within arm's reach of him at this very moment. Renzo smiled at his cousin, lifted his glass in silent toast, and made his second decision of the night. He would say nothing. Not yet. Not to anyone. 120 miles north of the warm library, where her father raised a poisoned glass to his cousin, in a thick patch of pine forest above the Hudson River, a small girl opened her eyes in the dark. The room was no bigger than a walk-in closet. Bare pine walls, a narrow iron cot pushed against the wall, a single window the size of a textbook, set high above the bed, crossed with 3 rusted iron bars on the inside and shuttered with weathered wood on the outside. A naked bulb hung from a cord above the door, but it had not been turned on in hours. The only light came from the thin silver line of moon that slipped between the shutter slats and traced a pale stripe across the splintered floor. Sofia Vitali was 7 years old, and she had been awake for a long time. She was thinner than she had been the morning of the strawberries. Her cheekbones stood out beneath skin that had not seen sunlight in nearly 3 weeks. Her once glossy black hair, which Maria used to braid every morning with such patience, was tangled and matted against the thin pillow. Her wrists, where they emerged from the sleeves of a too large gray sweatshirt that did not belong to her, looked like the wrists of a porcelain doll, but her eyes were still her father's eyes, dark, glittering, alert. They moved in the dimness with the focus of an animal that had decided not to die. She did not cry. She had stopped crying on the 3rd night, when she understood that crying made no sound louder than the wood creaking, and the men outside her door did not care. Tears, she had decided, were a luxury for children who still had time to be children. She no longer did. Beyond the thin door of her cell, the floorboards of the hallway creaked under a heavy, uneven weight. Sophia's lips moved silently as she counted. 1, 2, 3, pause. 4, 5, 23 steps from the corner of the staircase to the door of her room. Then a longer pause. Then the soft thud of a body lowering itself onto a wooden chair, the chair groaning in protest. The big one was on duty. Sophia had named them in her head, because she had not been told their names and she needed to keep them straight. The big one smelled of stale beer and old sweat. He was a head taller than her father and twice as wide. He carried a black pistol in a holster on his belt that he did not seem to know how to use properly, because the safety was always engaged. He came on shift every evening at exactly 8 o'clock, and within 40 minutes his head would begin to nod forward against his chest. By 10 o'clock he was asleep upright, his snore vibrating through the wall. The skinny one was different, sharper, younger. He smelled of cheap menthol cigarettes and something chemical underneath that Sophia did not yet have a word for. His hands shook slightly when he carried her tray. He went outside to smoke once every 2 hours, almost to the minute, and he was gone for between 7 and 9 minutes each time. When he returned, his eyes were glassier than before, and he sat in the chair humming songs she did not recognize. 19 nights. She had memorized 19 nights of these patterns, written nothing down, and forgotten nothing. In the silver stripe of moonlight on the floor, Sophia's fingers moved in a tiny secret pattern, a circle, a line, a circle, a line, the same shape her father used to trace on her palm when they sat in the rose garden at Old Westbury and played the game he called detective. Her father's voice came back to her now, low and warm, the way it always sounded when they were alone. "My Sophie, listen to me. The strongest enemy in any room is the one with habits. A man with habits is a man with a clock inside him. Find the clock, princess. Learn its tick. And when the time comes, you will walk out the door he forgot was even there." She had laughed when he said it, that summer afternoon, She had thought it was a game. In the dark cabin in the Hudson Valley forest, Sofia Vitali, age 7, closed her hand into a small, deliberate fist. She had found their clock. Now she was learning its tick. The next afternoon, while the small fist of his daughter still rested unseen in a forest 100 miles north, Renzo Vitali walked into a place where no one would think to look for him. The bar had no name carved above the door. The locals on Smith Street in Carroll Gardens called it Sal's. But Sal had been dead for 16 years, and the new owner had never bothered to change the sign because there was no sign. A single red bulb burned above a green door at the bottom of 3 concrete steps. Behind that door, the air was thick with the smell of cigar smoke that had soaked into the wood since the Kennedy administration. Renzo wore no overcoat, no tie, no rings. He had come alone. He had taken 3 cabs and walked the last 6 blocks. The bodyguards did not know where he was. Neither did Tony. Neither did his wife. At the back booth, beneath a yellowed photograph of Joe DiMaggio shaking hands with a man whose face had been deliberately scratched out, an old man was already waiting. Frank Russo was 71 years old, and he sat the way he had been taught to sit by a different generation, spine straight, hands flat on the table, back to the wall. His silver hair was combed straight back from a high forehead, and his eyes, the color of old slate, had not lost a single degree of their sharpness. He had served Renzo's father for 28 years before the old man died. He had served Renzo for 9 more. He was the family's family advisor, and he was the only man on earth Renzo trusted with what he was about to say. "Sit, my son." Franco gestured to the cracked leather bench across from him. A bottle of Amaro and 2 small glasses already waited between them. Renzo sat. He did not speak first. He poured. He waited. Franco studied his face for a long moment, the way an old jeweler studies a stone for hidden flaws. Then the old man let out a slow breath through his nose. "You felt it too, then," Franco said quietly. Renzo's jaw tightened. "Tell me what you saw." Franco lifted his glass and rolled the dark liquid against the light of the candle on the table. "Last Thursday, I was leaving the cigar room behind the social club on 86th Street. I needed air. I went out the side door, the one that opens onto the alley. I thought I was alone." He took a small, careful sip. Antonio was there, standing beside the dumpsters with a phone pressed to his ear. He had his back to me, so he did not see me at first. Renzo did not move, and he was speaking a language, Renzo. It was not English. It was not Italian. It was not French or Spanish or anything I have heard a Vitali man speak in 50 years of this life. Franco's old eyes did not blink. It had hard consonants, sharp, from somewhere east, Polish, perhaps, or Russian. I am not a linguist, but my ear is not dead yet. Renzo's hand tightened around his glass until his knuckles went white. Tony does not speak any language but English and the dialect of our grandmother's village. He failed Spanish in 10th grade. I helped him cheat on the final. I know. Then who taught him, Franco? Renzo's voice was barely above a whisper, but there was iron in it. Who teaches a man a foreign language and tells him to hide it from the cousin he has eaten dinner with every Sunday for 30 years? That, Franco said softly, is the question that has kept me from sleeping for 6 nights. A heavy silence fell between them. Somewhere at the bar, a glass clinked. A man laughed at something on the small television above the cash register. The world continued, oblivious. Franco leaned forward. His hand, lined with the small scars of a long life, settled over Renzo's wrist with a grip surprisingly firm. "Listen to me, young man. I have lived long enough to learn one thing about betrayal that the books do not write down. The most dangerous traitor is never the man across the table from you. He is the one who sits at your left hand at supper, the one who passes you the bread." Renzo looked into the eyes of the man who had taught his father how to be a boss, and who had taught him how to be a son. He nodded, slow and final. "Then we test the table. Franco, all of it, every chair." 2 old men, in a bar with no name, began to draw a map of poison. Renzo built the trap the way a master jeweler sets 3 identical stones into 3 different rings. He waited 2 days after the meeting at Sal's. 2 days of normal smiles, normal kisses on Isabella's forehead, normal handshakes with Tony in the morning over espresso, 2 days of feeding the household routine the same way he always had, so that nothing, not a glance, not a pause, not a held breath, would warn the rats that the floor beneath them had already been salted. On the 3rd morning, he laid the bait. He told Isabella about it in bed. She had been lying with her cheek against his chest, tracing slow circles on his skin with one painted nail, asking soft questions about when he might come home for dinner that week. He kissed the top of her head. He sighed the sigh of a tired husband, and then, almost as an afterthought, he murmured that there was a problem at a small, private dock in Sheepshead Bay. A shipment was coming in late on Thursday night, from Naples. Cigars, mostly, and a few personal items for old friends. He would have to be there himself, around 11 o'clock, just to make sure no one made a fuss. She had nodded against him. She had not asked a single follow-up question. That, by itself, was already strange. Isabella always asked follow-up questions. He told Tony in the back of the Lincoln on the way to a meeting in Bay Ridge. He framed it as a request for help. He wanted Tony to send 4 men on Thursday night, late, to a warehouse on Pier 11 in Red Hook. There was a counterfeit shipment of olive oil that needed to be quietly moved before the inspectors came around on Friday morning. Routine. Boring. Tony had nodded, made a note in his phone, and changed the subject to baseball. He told Marco's replacement, the new driver, a man named Vincenzo, who had been with the family for only a year and a half. He told Vincenzo, in the most casual voice he owned, that on Thursday night around 10:30, he would need to be driven to a private airstrip near Farmingdale, where a cousin from Sicily would be flying in unannounced. Vincenzo had said yes, sir, and had asked nothing else. 3 locations, 3 different people, 1 bait apiece. Renzo sat back, lit a cigarette he did not intend to smoke, and waited. 36 hours later, at 11:17 on Thursday night, the federal raid hit Sheepshead Bay. 22 agents in dark windbreakers came over the chain-link fence with flashlights and shotguns, and a warrant signed 3 hours earlier by a federal magistrate in Brooklyn. They breached an empty boathouse, tore apart an empty crate, and arrested a confused fisherman who happened to be tying up at the wrong slip. There were no cigars. There were no Vitali men. There was only a single black sedan parked across the inlet with its lights off. A sedan with no plates that pulled away the moment the first flashlights swept the water. By midnight, Renzo had his answer. The leak had come from Isabella. He sat in the dark of his study at Old Westbury when the call came in from Franco. He did not move for a long time after he hung up. He did not pour himself a drink. He did not break anything. He simply turned his chair slowly toward the window and watched the moon move behind the bare branches of the oaks at the edge of the property. His wife, the mother of his daughter, in everything but blood, the woman who had brushed Sophia's hair every Sunday morning and called her princess with a voice so warm that Renzo had once believed it could not be faked. She had given him to the wolves. He waited for the rage. He waited for the cold satisfaction of being right. Neither one arrived. What arrived instead, in the small dark hours of Friday morning, was something else. He stood quietly outside the door of the master bathroom. The light beneath the door was on. The water in the sink was running, full force. A sound meant to mask another sound. He pressed his ear closer. Isabella was crying. Not the polite, performative tears she had shed at the cemetery. Not the soft sobs of a grieving mother. These were different. Ragged, choking, the kind of crying a person does when they are alone with something they cannot survive. He listened for almost a minute. He heard her whisper something into her own hands. He could not make out the words, but he caught the tone. It was the tone of a woman terrified out of her mind. Renzo stepped back from the door without a sound. He returned to his study, sat down at his desk, and wrote a single line in the small leather notebook he kept locked in the bottom drawer. She is not the winner, she is the prey. Below it, in the same precise handwriting, he wrote a second line. There is a third hand at this table. While her father wrote 2 cold lines in a leather notebook 100 miles south, Sophia Vitali was already 3 days into a plan of her own. Hers had no notebook. It lived only inside her head, behind a face she had trained to stay blank. The first day of the plan, she ate exactly half of her dinner, a few spoonfuls of the lukewarm canned soup, 3 bites of the white bread that tasted like paper. She left the rest. She did not push the tray away with drama. She simply stopped, set the spoon down quietly, and turned her face to the wall as if she were too tired to lift it. The skinny one had picked up the tray, frowned, and said nothing. He reported it to no one. That had been her test, and he had passed it for her. The second day she ate less. The third day, almost nothing. On the morning of the 4th day, she made herself sick. She did it the way some part of her body already seemed to remember, even though she was only 7. 2 small fingers down the back of her own throat, fast, before she could think too much about it. The thin gruel of the previous night came up in a sour rush onto the floorboards beside the cot. She wiped her mouth on the corner of the sweatshirt sleeve and lay back, eyes half closed, breath shallow and rasping. When the big one unlocked the door at 8 in the morning, he stopped in the doorway as though he had walked into a wall. The smell hit him first, Then the sight of the small, pale girl on the cot, hair plastered to her forehead with sweat she had created 2 minutes earlier by pressing a hot, wet washcloth to her own skin and hiding the cloth under the pillow. Her cheeks were flushed from the same trick. Her lips, which she had bitten until they were raw and dry-looking, trembled exactly as much as she had practiced. "Hey," the big one grunted. He did not come closer. "Hey, kid, you sick?" Sophia let her eyes drift open and then closed again. She did not answer. He cursed under his breath in a language that had nothing to do with English. He fumbled at his belt, pulled out a cheap black flip phone, and stomped back down the hallway, already speaking fast and low to someone she could not see. She did not move. She did not smile. She kept her breathing shallow and uneven for a full 10 minutes after the door clanged shut, in case he came back without warning. Her father had taught her that, too, in the rose garden, the day they had played hide-and-seek for an entire afternoon. The game does not end when you think it ends. The game ends when you are sure. By that evening, the big one was a different man. His face, when he came in with a tray of plain crackers and warm broth, was no longer flat with boredom. It was tight. The corner of his mouth twitched. When he set the tray down on the small wooden side table beside the cot, his hand shook so hard, the broth spilled onto the wood. He did not wipe it. Sophia understood at once. He was afraid. Not of her, of someone above him. Whoever paid the big one had given him one job and one job only: keep the little girl alive. A dead child was no use to anyone. A dead child meant a dead guard, dropped into a hole in the woods. He left medicine on the side table that night. A small white bottle of children's fever reducer and, beside it, a strip of foil-wrapped tablets she did not recognize. He did not lock the drawer of the side table when he stepped out for the call he made every evening at 8:30. He had been in too much of a hurry. The little metal handle stayed dark, untouched, waiting. Sophia waited until his uneven breathing in the hallway told her he had returned to the chair. She waited longer, until that breathing turned slow and heavy with the early stages of his usual nodding sleep. Then, with the silence of a creature half her size and twice her age, she rolled off the cot onto the splintered floor. She slid the side table drawer open, one careful inch at a time. Inside, beneath a half-empty packet of tissues and a bent matchbook from a diner she had never heard of, lay treasure. A single bent paperclip, larger than any she had ever seen. A short length of stiff copper wire, curled at one end, the kind used to hold a cabinet hinge in place. She closed her small fingers around them, as if they were made of glass. In her father's voice, from a sunny afternoon that felt like another lifetime, she heard the words again: Little Mechanic. The game was called Little Mechanic. 2 pieces, princess. A long one to push the pins, a short one to turn the cylinder. Slow hands, quiet breath. She slid the wire and the paperclip carefully into the seam of her pillowcase, where the stitching had loosened from age. She smoothed the fabric flat. She climbed back under the thin blanket, turned her face toward the dark window, and let her eyelids fall shut. For the first time in 19 nights, the corner of her mouth lifted in the smallest, most secret smile. Tonight she would not run. Tonight she would only listen, and breathe, and wait. Tomorrow, the door he had forgotten was even there would begin to open. The night came quieter than usual. Even the wind outside, which had whispered through the pines for 19 nights without rest, seemed to be holding its breath. Sophia lay on the cot in the dark with the paperclip and the copper wire still tucked safely inside the loose seam of her pillowcase. She had not slept. She did not intend to. Her small body kept the rhythm of slow, even breathing for the benefit of any ear pressed against the door. But every other part of her was awake and listening. A few minutes past midnight, she heard something new. Tires. Not the rusted pickup the skinny one drove on supply runs, the one that wheezed and rattled like an old man climbing stairs. This was a deeper sound, low, smooth, expensive. The sound of a vehicle that did not belong on a dirt access road in the middle of the Hudson Valley woods. The car came up the slope with deliberate slowness and stopped a short distance from the cabin. 2 doors opened, 2 doors closed. Boots crossed the gravel with a measured, unhurried weight that made the big one's heavy stomp sound like a child's tantrum by comparison. Sophia turned her head a fraction of an inch on the pillow. She angled her ear toward the gap beneath the door, where the warm yellow light from the hallway leaked in like a thin gold thread. The front door of the cabin opened. The big one greeted the new arrival with a stiffness that made his voice crack on the very first word. "Sir, you were not expected to expect." The new voice cut through the air like a thrown knife. Sophia's heart skipped one beat, then steadied. She had never heard this voice before in her life. And yet somehow, in the deepest place inside her chest, She knew it was the voice she had been waiting to hear. It was a man's voice, low, patient, the kind of patient that came from the iron certainty of always getting what one wanted. Eventually, there was an accent under it, a soft shaping of the consonants that did not belong to anyone she had ever met at her father's dinner table. It was Eastern, Slavic, perhaps, the kind of accent that traveled out of a forest in a country whose name she had only seen on a globe. "Where is she?" the voice asked. "Down the hall, sir, asleep. She was running a fever this morning. We have given her the medicine." A long pause, then the click of a lighter, the faint smell of expensive tobacco, not menthol, drifted under the door. "You will not give her any more medicine without instruction." Each word was set down like a coin onto a marble counter. "Are we understood?" "Yes, sir. Of course, sir. Listen to me carefully." The smooth voice grew almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. "The architect does not require the child to die yet. The architect requires Vitali to break first. The man must watch his world collapse stone by stone, and only when he is on his knees in front of his own grave, only then, will the order come." The big one's reply was a swallowed grunt. "Until that order comes," the voice continued, "the girl breathes. She eats. She does not bruise. If I return to find a single mark on her skin that I did not put there myself, I will remove the part of you that put it there. Are we understood?" "Yes, sir." "Good." A pause. The strike of a match, the shift of weight on old floorboards. "And the wife? Does she still believe?" "She still believes, sir." "Good," the voice said again. "Let her keep believing. A frightened woman is a quieter woman. Let her sleep beside her husband and dream of saving a child she does not know is alive." The voices moved away from the door. The conversation broke into pieces Sophia could no longer catch, then into footsteps, then into the closing of the front door, and the quiet hum of the engine receding back down the dirt road. Sophia did not move for a long time. She lay perfectly still on the cot, eyes wide open in the dark, her thin chest rising and falling with the practiced calm of a child still pretending to be asleep. But inside, every certainty she had built over the last 19 days was being torn apart and rebuilt in seconds. It was not Isabella. Not really. Not in the way she had thought. The men in the hallway answered to someone else. Someone bigger. Someone with a name that sounded like a job. A man called the architect, who had decided that her father deserved to suffer before he was allowed to die. A man who owned the wife. A man who owned the cabin. A man who, perhaps, had owned the Vitali family for a long time without anyone knowing. Sophia turned her head slowly toward the dark window with the 3 rusted bars. The plan had changed. She had thought she could afford to wait several more nights, to study the big one's nodding rhythm 1 or 2 more times, to perfect the angle of the paperclip, to choose the perfect hour. That was the plan of a girl who believed she had time. She no longer had time. Whoever this architect was, his order to end her could come tomorrow, or tonight. Her small hand slipped beneath the pillow and closed around the curl of copper wire. The metal was cold against her palm. "Tomorrow night," she promised the dark window. "Whatever happens, tomorrow night," the door opens. Sophia waited for the digital clock on the hallway wall to bleed its faint red glow under the door and tell her it was 3 in the morning. She had counted the big one's snores the way a sailor counts waves. Long inhale, 2-beat pause, snorting exhale. He had reached the deepest stretch of his sleep just past 2:30. The part of the night her father had once called the hour of the wolf. The skinny one had gone outside 14 minutes ago for his cigarette, which meant he had at most 6 minutes left before he came back. She would not need 6. She would need 3. She slid out from under the thin blanket without disturbing a single fold. Her bare feet touched the splintered floor with the lightness of a moth. She pulled the paperclip and the copper wire free of the pillow seam, took one long, controlled breath, and crouched in front of the door. She slipped the bent paperclip into the lower part of the keyhole. The copper wire went in above it, angled the way her father had shown her on the rusted padlock. He had hung on the rose trellis as a pretend treasure chest. The first pin gave it 20 seconds. The second pin fought her. She could feel it, stubborn and slightly bent, refusing to drop. Her small fingers were trembling now, not from fear, but from the strain of holding the wire at exactly the right pressure for so long. Her bare knees ached against the cold floor. A bead of sweat slid down her temple, and she did not lift a hand to wipe it. 3 minutes. 4. 5. Sweat between her shoulder blades. The skinny one's smoke break ticking down somewhere outside. At 5 minutes and 40 seconds, the second pin gave with a soft click. She felt more than heard. The third pin took another minute. The fourth pin was the easiest of all. At 6 minutes and 51 seconds by her own internal count, the cylinder turned half a degree under her wire. The bolt slid free with a whisper. She had once done it in 3 minutes flat, in sunlight, with her father laughing behind her shoulder. She would never again think of that game as a game. Sophia rose from her crouch like a cat stretching out of sleep. She slid the paperclip and the wire into the front pocket of the gray sweatshirt. She eased the door open 1 slow inch at a time, listening between every breath. The hallway beyond was empty. The big one sat slumped in the wooden chair at the end of the corridor, his chin on his chest, a small dark patch of drool spreading on his shirt. His snore came on schedule. She moved past him at half a step at a time, each foot placed only on the boards she had already mapped as silent during 19 days of listening. She did not look at his face. She did not look at the gun on his belt. She kept her eyes on the dim doorway of the kitchen at the far end of the hall. Inside the kitchen, a single hanging bulb threw a yellow circle onto the table. The skinny one's belongings were spread across the wood like a careless child's homework. A pack of menthols, a lighter, 2 empty energy drink cans, and, plugged into the wall beside the toaster, a battered old flip phone with the screen glowing a faint and beautiful green. 18% battery. Enough. Sophia disconnected the phone from the charger without making the cable snap against the counter. She tucked it into the front pocket beside the paperclip. From the bread box on the counter, she took half a loaf of stale rye and pressed it under one arm. From the wooden block by the stove, she lifted out the smallest paring knife, no longer than her hand, and slid it carefully into the waistband of her sweatpants with the blade pointing down. The laundry room was 3 steps further. The window above the dryer had been painted shut, but the lock above the latch was a simple twist mechanism. She climbed onto the dryer in absolute silence. She turned the lock. She pressed both palms against the lower frame and pushed. The window groaned a single, terrible inch and stuck. She froze. She listened. The big one's snore did not break. She pushed again, harder this time, throwing all of her 38 pounds against the swollen wood. The frame popped free with a soft thud and slid up just enough for a small body to squeeze through. Cold night air rushed in around her face. It smelled of pine and wet earth and freedom. Sophia slipped one leg out, then the other. She balanced on the narrow ledge for half a heartbeat. Then she dropped. She landed in a thicket of low juniper bushes, the needles tearing at her bare ankles, the impact rolling her shoulder into the soft mulch. She tasted blood where she had bitten her own lip on the way down. She did not care. She rolled to her feet. She gripped the bread under one arm, and she ran. She ran across the small clearing behind the cabin, past the stack of split firewood, across the gravel drive, and into the wall of black pines that rose at the edge of the property. She ran with the loose, low gait of a small animal that has learned what the word predator means. The cold ground bit at her bare feet. Branches whipped against her cheeks. She did not slow. She had made it 40 yards into the trees when, behind her, in the cabin she had just escaped, a deep and unmistakable bark split the night. It was not a domestic bark. It was the deep, wet, hungry sound of a German shepherd that had just caught a scent on the wind. A single male voice followed it, sharp and furious in a language she now recognized. The hunt had begun. While the German shepherd's bark cut through the pines 100 miles north, Renzo Vitale was sitting at a table in a private dining room above a fish market in Sheepshead Bay, looking at a plain manila folder. It was just past 1 in the morning. The shutters were drawn. The waiters had been sent home an hour earlier. Only Franco and one other man sat with him. The third man at the table was small, 60 years old, balding, with the rumpled look of an accountant who had not slept well in a week. His name was Henry Glasser, and he had once been the youngest forensic investigator in the FBI's New York field office before a disagreement with his superiors had freed him to charge 5 times his old salary working for clients he never spoke about. Franco had used him for 19 years. Renzo had used him only once before, the year his father died. Henry did not eat. He did not drink. He had a glass of water in front of him that he had not touched. He pushed the folder across the white linen tablecloth with one long finger. "You will not enjoy this," he said quietly. Renzo opened the folder. The first sheet inside was a black and white photocopy of a wire transfer statement. The bank logo in the top corner was a Czech name, with a small green crown printed beside it, Komerční banka, branch number 41, located in a quiet outer district of Prague. The account holder was listed under a name Renzo had never heard. Some Slovak surname, 6 letters long, paired with a first name that meant nothing to him. The address tied to the account was a small apartment in a working-class neighborhood on the east bank of the Vltava. Below the account header, a column ran down the page. Quarterly deposits, the same amount each time, 200,000 United States dollars. converted on arrival into Czech koruna, wired in from a holding company registered in Cyprus that owned 3 other holding companies, all of them connected by a paper trail Henry had needed 9 days to unwind. 40 deposits, Henry said softly, 1 every quarter, going back 10 full years. Renzo did not look up from the page. $8 million. $8 million in change, paid out to the same beneficiary across a decade. Never a single late payment, never a single interruption. The man who set up that account did not ask for it. He is paid for service rendered. He has been on someone's payroll since the autumn of the year your father was alive. Franco lifted his eyes to Renzo. Show him the photograph, Henry. Henry slid the second sheet out from beneath the first. It was a passport scan, clearly obtained by means Renzo did not need to know. The face that stared up from the photograph was younger, leaner, the hair cut shorter, but the eyes were unmistakable. The slight crook in the bridge of the nose where it had been broken in a high school fight. The small scar above the left eyebrow. The man in the photograph was Antonio Vitali. The name printed beside the face was not. Renzo placed his hand flat on the table and held it there, very still. He used a second identity to open this, he said, more to himself than to the others. His voice did not rise. It dropped. A passport in another name, a bank account in a country he has no reason to know, quarterly payments that started 10 years ago. Franco nodded once. 10 years ago this October. The number landed in Renzo's chest like a slow blade. October. 10 years ago this October. He saw it again, the way he had seen it 1,000 times in his dreams. The stretch of sidewalk on Avenue U outside the old social club. His father, Antonio's uncle, walking out of the back door of the cigar room at 11:30 at night. The black sedan that came around the corner too fast. The first muzzle flash from the open passenger window. His father stumbling, falling against the brick wall. And then Tony, his cousin Tony, 24 years old, throwing himself across the old man like a bodyguard out of a movie. The sedan screeching away. Tony screaming for help with blood on his hands that, the doctors had later told them, was not entirely his own. The bullet that grazed his shoulder. The bullet that had made him a hero of the Vitale family for the rest of his life. Renzo's father had recovered. He had insisted, against the protests of the older captains, that the boy who took a bullet from him be brought into the family's inner circle. Within 2 years, Tony was a made man. Within 4, he sat at the right hand of the next boss. Renzo lifted his eyes from the photograph. They were the eyes of a man looking at the bottom of a well he had been drinking from for 10 years without knowing. It was staged, he said quietly. The words tasted of iron. The whole thing, the shooter, the sedan, the bullet that conveniently grazed his arm. Someone bought my cousin and then bought him a hero's welcome at our table. Franco closed the folder gently. It explains everything. Figlio, the promotions Tony asked for, the shipping routes he kept pushing for the family to expand into, the Eastern European contacts he started bringing to us 5 years ago. He has been steering this family for a decade like a man steering a horse he was paid to ride. And when the time was right, Renzo said, almost in a whisper, he gave away my schedule. He helped take my daughter. Henry looked down at his folded hands. He did not interrupt, but Franco leaned forward, and his old slate eyes locked onto Renzo's with a question that demanded to be asked aloud. Renzo, listen to me. $200,000 a quarter for 10 straight years is not a contract that a foot soldier writes. That is the budget of an army. The man who set this up did not just buy your cousin. He invested in him. He planted him in our family the way a king plants a spy in a rival kingdom, and then waits a generation for the harvest. The room went very still. Renzo stared down at the photograph of the boy he had grown up with, the cousin whose teeth he had helped knock loose in a schoolyard brawl in 3rd grade. Who, he said, his voice barely a sound, has the patience and the money to plant a man inside the strongest family on the East Coast for 10 years before he uses him? Franco did not answer. Outside the shuttered window, somewhere far above the lights of the city, a name neither of them could yet say aloud waited for them in the dark. The forest was a black ocean, and Sophia was a small fish trying to outrun the shark. She ran low, elbows tucked, the bread crushed under one arm, and the little paring knife bumping against her hip. Behind her, the shepherd's bark had become a chain of sounds, the noise of a dog towing 2 men through the trees on a leash. A flashlight beam swept across the pines. Sophia threw herself flat behind a fallen log and pressed her cheek into the cold mulch. The light slid past, hesitated, came back. She did not breathe. Footsteps crashed by, no more than 15 yards to her right. She went toward the ridge. The skinny one snarled. Move. The lights bobbed away. Sophia counted to 20, then crawled. Not in the direction they had gone, and not in the opposite direction either, but at a sharp angle to both. Her father's voice was with her again. From a sunny afternoon in the rose garden. Smell follows the wind, princess. You do not run downwind. You crawl into the wind. You become a ghost. She tested the air against her cheek. The breeze moved from the southwest. She pointed her body into it and crawled. The mulch tore at her bare knees. Twice the shepherd's bark turned her way, and twice it lost her, because the wind had eaten her scent before it could reach the dog's nose. When her elbows finally met something cold and wet, she almost cried out from relief. A stream, narrow, rushing over flat stones in the dark. She rolled into it without hesitation. The water punched the air from her lungs. She bit the inside of her cheek to keep from gasping. Water cuts the trail, Sophie. Water makes you new. She followed the current for 40 paces, then dragged her shivering body up the far bank and climbed the broadest pine she could reach. 2 branches up she froze, arms locked around the trunk, breath held until her chest burned. Both men passed beneath her, no more than 10 feet down. The shepherd circled, whined, lost. She is in the brush, the skinny one spat. Sweep wider. The lights moved on. Sophia waited until she could no longer hear them, then counted to 200 more. The game does not end when you think it ends. She climbed down on shaking arms and turned again into the wind. 20 minutes later, a sharp, angry whisper of leaves above her head changed everything. A bullet, fired blind through the canopy, ripped through the green needles a foot above her hair. Bark exploded from the trunk beside her cheek. Splinters stung her face. A second shot whined past lower and buried itself with a thud into a tree trunk somewhere ahead. Sophia threw herself flat into the wet leaves. Her heart, which had stayed steady through 19 days of darkness, finally broke into a sprint. Not from the bullet. From what the bullet meant. They were no longer trying to bring her back alive. The order had changed. Whatever she had heard about the architect and her father, they could not afford for her to carry it into the world. She was not a hostage anymore. She was a witness. A witness was a body to be silenced. She crawled until her palms bled. She crawled until the trees thinned, and a thin gray ribbon of asphalt cut through the dark. A road. A real road. And on the shoulder of it, idling, with hazard lights blinking a slow orange rhythm against the trees, sat the long, boxy shape of a refrigerated milk truck. The driver had stepped down and stood 20 feet ahead with his back turned, urinating against a tree. The rear cargo door was unlatched. Sophia did not think. She rose from the ditch, ran in a low crouch, and pulled the door open 1 careful inch. The cold inside breathed out at her. She climbed in, pulled the door closed until the latch clicked, and crawled between 2 stacks of plastic milk crates. A minute later, the diesel engine coughed once and settled into a low rolling hum. The truck pulled away from the shoulder. Sophia pressed her forehead against the cold metal floor and, for the first time in 19 nights, allowed herself 10 silent seconds to cry. The truck rolled south for what Sophia guessed was almost an hour. She lay between the crates of cold gallon jugs in absolute stillness, her wet sweatshirt slowly stiffening in the chilled air, her bare feet tucked underneath her thighs for warmth. The diesel hum vibrated up through the metal floor and into her ribs. Every now and then the truck slowed for a curve, and a few of the plastic jugs shifted with a soft thump, and Sophia tensed her whole small body until they settled again. She did not sleep. She did not let her eyes close for longer than a blink. She had escaped a cabin and a dog, and 2 bullets, only to find herself in a metal box she could not steer. When the truck finally slowed and turned, the change in sound told her everything. The smooth hum of asphalt gave way to the rougher rattle of an old gas station lot. The brakes hissed. The engine fell into idle. The driver climbed out of the cab, slammed his door, and his boots crunched away across the gravel toward what she guessed was a convenience store. A bell jingled in the distance. Sophia waited a full 30 seconds before she dared to move. She crawled to the rear door of the cargo box. The hinges had a tiny gap on the right side where the rubber seal had cracked with age, and through that crack the night air bled in along with a thin sliver of light. She put her eye to the gap. The world outside was a small rural fueling station, with 3 pumps and a row of yellow halogen lamps that buzzed against the dark. 2 pickup trucks stood at the far pumps. A single car sat parked along the side of the lot, near the air pump at the corner. That car made Sophia's breath stop in her throat. It was a black Mercedes sedan, polished to such a deep mirror finish that the halogen lamps were painted across its hood like wet streaks of paint. It had no plates on the front bumper, the kind of car her father drove when he did not want a name attached to a journey. The rear door of the Mercedes opened. A man stepped out. Tony. Sophia's whole body went rigid against the cold metal of the truck door. Her own cousin. Her father's right hand. The man who had carried her on his shoulders at her 6th birthday party and pretended she was a small queen. Tony, here, on a forgotten gas station lot in the middle of the night, more than 100 miles from where he should have been. He was not alone. A second man stepped out of the Mercedes from the front passenger side. He was tall, taller than Tony by a full head, broad through the shoulders, even beneath the heavy wool coat with the dark fur collar that he wore against the autumn cold. His hair was completely silver, swept back from a high, hard forehead. His face was lean and unsmiling, and carved at angles that did not soften when the halogen light fell on it. Even at this distance, through the crack in a rubber seal, Sophia could see his eyes. They were the color of wet steel. They did not blink. She did not know his name. She did not need to. The voice in the cabin hallway last night had a face now, and this was the face. The architect. He spoke to Tony quietly. Sophia could not hear a single word over the hum of the gas pumps and the buzz of the lamps, but she could read what happened next without sound. Tony, who had walked into Vitali meetings for 10 years with the swagger of a prince, lowered his head. He did not nod. He did not bow politely. He bent his neck and dropped his chin almost to his own chest, and held it there for a slow, deliberate count of 2. It was the posture of a soldier in front of a general, the posture of a dog in front of the man who fed him. The silver-haired man placed a gloved hand on Tony's shoulder, gave it a single slow squeeze, and let go. Sophia's small fingers were already moving. She fished the battered flip phone out of her sweatshirt pocket. The green screen lit up. 11% battery. She flipped it open, found the camera icon, and pressed the lens to the rubber gap. The autofocus on a phone this old was a slow and noisy thing. It hunted in the dark, struggling against the halogen glare, against the angle, against the dust on its tiny lens. She held her breath. She pressed the button. The shutter sound clicked. She muffled the speaker against her chest and prayed it had not carried. Outside, the silver-haired man turned his head a fraction. His steel eyes lifted. They scanned the dark lot for the source of a sound that should not have existed there. Sophia did not move. She did not breathe. She did not blink. The phone trembled in her grip. The man's gaze passed over the milk truck, then over the pickups, then over the road beyond the pumps. After 3 of the longest seconds of Sophia's life, his eyes returned to Tony. He said one more thing. Tony nodded again, deeper than before. Both men climbed back into the Mercedes. The black sedan pulled out of the lot in absolute silence and slid away into the dark, like a long knife sliding into a sheath. Sophia exhaled. She lifted the phone. The photograph in the small screen was grainy, washed out by the halogen lamps, blurred slightly at the corners, but the silver hair, the fur collar, the steel eyes were clear enough that anyone who knew him would know him. She closed the phone gently against her chest like an animal protecting a wound. She did not have his name, but she had his face, and she now understood something else. The truth that had grown in her since the cabin hallway and bloomed fully in this gas station lot. Her father did not have one enemy. Her father had 2, and one of them was already inside his house. Renzo came home 2 hours earlier than he had told anyone he would. He instructed the driver to stop at the back gate of the estate and walk the last quarter-mile alone, through the bare oaks of the rear garden, his footsteps muffled by the wet leaves. He used the servants' entrance. He nodded once at the night cook, who knew better than to acknowledge that she had seen him. He climbed the back staircase in his stocking feet, his shoes hooked through 2 fingers of his left hand. The library door at the end of the upstairs corridor was open by an inch. A flickering orange glow spilled out onto the carpet. Renzo stopped where the shadows still hid him. Inside the library, Isabella was on her knees in front of the marble fireplace. She wore no makeup. Her dark hair was pulled back into a hasty knot. The silk robe he had grown to recognize had been replaced by an old flannel one she had not worn in years, and the contrast told him everything before she did. This was not a woman performing for an audience. This was a woman who had believed, with absolute certainty, that no audience would walk in. In her hand was a small, folded square of paper. She held it over the flames for a long moment, and her shoulders shook in a way that had nothing to do with crying. It was the shaking of a body trying to make itself small enough to disappear. She let go. The paper fell into the fire and curled into a black orchid before turning to ash. Renzo stepped through the door without sound. "What are you burning, Isabella?" She froze on her knees. She did not turn. For 1 full second, she did not even breathe. Then she rose, slowly, the firelight painting half of her face in orange and leaving the other half in cold dark. Renzo. Her voice cracked on his name. I did not hear you come in. I know. He crossed the room with the same measured pace he had used at the cemetery. He did not raise his voice. He did not reach for her shoulders. Instead, he reached for her hand. His fingers closed around hers with a gentleness that, in the world of Renzo Vitale, was more terrifying than a fist. Sit, amore. He guided her to the leather chair. He knelt in front of her. He kept her hand in his. When he lifted his eyes to hers, his voice was the softest it had been in 3 weeks. Who are you afraid of, Isabella? She broke, not into the careful tears she had used at his side every night since the explosion, into something raw. Her face crumpled. Her free hand flew up to cover her mouth, then to her eyes, then back to her chest, as if she did not know which part of herself to hold first. The sound that came out of her was not pretty. It was the sound of a dam that had been holding back a black river for a very long time. I cannot, she whispered. Renzo, please, I cannot. He did not move. He did not blink. You can. You will. Tell me, Isabella. Who? Her words came out in fragments, the way confession always does when it has been buried for years. She had been 24. A different city, a different life. There had been a man who promised her things he never delivered, and there had been a baby she could not keep without losing every other part of her future. She had not given the child away. She had hidden him. A small house in a quiet neighborhood outside Boston, a cousin who had agreed to raise the boy as her own. A new last name, a new birth certificate, a new history. 8 years of monthly checks paid in cash through a P.O. box. 8 years of believing the secret was safe. 8 months ago, on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday, an envelope had arrived at her private mailbox in Garden City. No return address. Inside, a single photograph of a small boy walking out of a school in Brookline with a backpack shaped like a green dinosaur. Then a phone call. A voice she had never heard. A voice with a soft, Eastern shape to its consonants. The voice had told her that the boy with the green backpack would die in a hit-and-run accident if she did not provide certain information about her husband's schedule, his shipments, his routes. Small things at first, then larger things. They told me, she sobbed. They only wanted information. They told me the worst that would happen would be a federal raid, that Renzo would lose some money, that he would never even know I had been involved. I never thought they would touch Sophia. She gripped his hand with both of hers now, tears running down her wrists. They told me she would only be missing for a few days. A frightening accident, a scare to bend you. They swore to me, Renzo. They swore she would come home. I believed them. God help me, I believed them. And then the explosion happened, and I knew something had gone wrong, and I have been holding her dead body on my conscience for 3 weeks. Renzo did not speak. He looked down at the trembling hands that gripped his. He looked at the woman he had married. He looked at the smoldering ash in the grate, the last evidence of whatever the latest message had been, and he understood at last what his notebook had told him days ago. She was not the player. She was a piece that had been moved by a hand 1,000 miles away from this fire. He did not forgive her. The cold, hard part of him that had built an empire would never forgive her, but he also did not stand up and end her, the way Renzo Vitale of 3 weeks ago might have. Because Renzo Vitale of 3 weeks ago had not yet known about the silver-haired man, or the bank account in Prague, or the patient 10-year hand that had been arranging chess pieces inside his own house. He squeezed her trembling fingers once, lightly, and stood. You will do exactly what I tell you next, he said quietly, and if you do, I will save your son in Brookline. Are we understood, Isabella? She nodded, weeping, unable to speak. He turned toward the door, and a different fire had taken hold inside his eyes. The piece had confessed. Now he would go after the hand. The milk truck rolled into the Hunts Point market just before 3 in the morning. The diesel rumble eased into the longer rhythm of a long line of trucks idling under sodium lamps. Cargo doors banged open across the loading bays. Men shouted in Spanish and Portuguese. The air carried the sharp scent of fish guts from the seafood market 2 blocks over and the sweet rot of yesterday's produce. Sophia waited until her own driver climbed down and walked away to talk to a dispatcher. Then she eased the cargo door open just enough to slip out, dropped to the cracked asphalt, and ducked behind the rear wheel well. She straightened her sweatshirt, hid the phone deeper in her pocket, and crossed the lot at a child's slow-walking pace, the only speed at which a small girl in dirty clothes could move through a place like this without drawing attention. 2 forklift drivers passed her. Neither one looked twice. To them, she was just one more lost kid trailing behind a parent who was probably arguing prices 3 rows over. Outside the gate, the Bronx was a sprawl of warehouse roofs, and the orange glow of the elevated subway tracks in the distance. Sophia stopped on the corner of an empty street and breathed in the cold city air. She had only one address in her head: Russo and Sons, a small Italian bakery on 86th Street in Bensonhurst. Franco had taken her there every other Sunday for as long as she could remember. He used to lift her up onto the high glass counter so she could point to the cannoli with the most pistachio crumbs on top. The lady behind the counter, Franco's wife Rosa, always pretended to scold him and then slipped Sophia an extra sfogliatella in a paper bag. She had no money. She had no shoes. She did not know how far Bensonhurst was from where she stood. She knew only the train line that went there. Franco had pointed it out to her once on a map at the kitchen table. She walked. She walked along the edge of an industrial avenue with her head down and her arms folded tight across her thin chest. She kept her eyes on the cracked sidewalk and let her hair fall forward over her face. She passed a homeless man asleep in a doorway, and she passed a woman crying quietly into a cell phone, and neither of them looked up at her. 40 minutes later, she found a bus stop with a route map bolted to a metal pole. She stood on her toes and read it under the orange streetlight. 2 transfers, a ride south, a long walk at the end, 6 hours, maybe more. The first bus driver almost did not let her on. He squinted at her bare feet and her wild hair and the bread she still carried under one arm. She lifted her face to him and said, in the smallest, tiredest voice she could shape, that she had to get to her grandfather's bakery in Brooklyn. He stared at her for a long second. Then he sighed the long sigh of a man who had been driving the night route for 15 years and had decided long ago that the small mercies were the ones God noticed. He waved her on without a fare. She slept in 20-minute pieces against the cold window. She got off at the wrong stop near the Manhattan Bridge and had to ask a waitress at an all-night diner for directions. The waitress gave her a glass of milk and a dry roll and pointed her toward the right corner. The second time she got lost was in an unfamiliar block of Sunset Park, where the streets did not run the way her memory expected them to. She turned twice the wrong way before she realized. That was how she ended up in the alley. A man stepped out from behind a green dumpster, faster than a man that size should have been able to move. His hand closed around her thin wrist with a grip that was already pulling. "Hey, sweetheart, you lost? Come here. I'll help you." Sophia did not scream. Her father had told her once, in the rose garden, that screaming wasted breath she might need. She bent her small body forward as if she were going to cry into his hand, and then she opened her mouth and bit down on the meat of his thumb with every ounce of strength a hungry 7-year-old still had. She tasted iron. The man howled. His grip broke. Sophia ran. She ran with the loose, desperate stride she had learned in the woods. She did not look back. She tore through 2 blocks at a speed that should not have been possible for a child who had not eaten properly in 3 weeks. And when she finally turned a corner and ducked into the recessed doorway of a closed laundromat, she crouched there with her hand pressed against her own mouth, shaking, until she was certain no footsteps were following. She kept moving. The sky began to soften from black to a deep slate blue. The first delivery vans of the morning rolled past. The smell of fresh bread drifted from a kitchen vent at the back of a corner restaurant. When she finally turned onto the familiar stretch of 86th Street and saw the green and gold lettering of Russo and Sons painted across the front window, the morning light was the color of a pearl. Sophia walked the last 50 feet on legs that no longer wanted to hold her up. She lifted her small fist and knocked. Then again, harder. Then she pounded with the side of her hand because her knuckles were too tired. A light came on in the back of the bakery. Footsteps approached the door, slow and irritated, and the lock clicked. The door swung open. A short woman in her late 60s, gray hair tucked under a flour-dusted kerchief, holding a porcelain plate of cannoli that she had been about to set in the front case, stood in the doorway. Rosa Russo looked down at the small, filthy, barefoot child standing on her welcome mat. The plate slid from her hand. 3 cannoli hit the tile floor. The porcelain cracked clean in half. "My God," Rosa whispered, both hands flying to her own chest. "Sophie." Sophia tried to speak. She could not. She simply lifted her arms toward the only adult woman besides Maria who had ever given her a sfogliatella in a paper bag. Rosa caught her before her knees hit the doorstep. Franco arrived at the bakery 17 minutes after Rosa's call. He came in through the back, the way he had been entering kitchens for 50 years. And the moment he saw the small bundle wrapped in his wife's blue wool blanket on the stool by the bread oven, his old slate eyes filled with something he had not allowed himself to feel in a long time. He did not say her name. He simply walked forward and gathered her against his chest with arms that still remembered how to lift a child. Sophia's small hand fisted into the lapel of his coat and would not let go. He did not waste another minute. He bundled her into the back seat of an unmarked Buick parked in the alley, drove south through the slow morning traffic on the Belt Parkway and crossed the Verrazano Bridge at the moment the sun lifted over the harbor and turned the water to copper. His destination was a narrow 2-story house on a quiet block in Tottenville at the southern tip of Staten Island, a place no member of the Vitali family but Franco himself had ever set foot in. Inside, he wrapped Sofia in a fresh blanket, set a mug of warm milk into her shaking hands, and made the call. He did not use his cell phone. He used the encrypted line in the basement, the one his father had installed in the 70s, and which he had updated 3 times since. He dialed the number that only 7 people on Earth knew. It rang once. Franco. Renzo's voice on the other end was tight with bad sleep. What is it? You need to listen to me very carefully, Filio. You need to come to the address I am about to give you, alone, by car, with no escort and no phone calls on the way. You need to come right now. A pause. A long pause. Franco, tell me why. Franco closed his eyes. His own voice cracked on the words. Because she is here, Renzo. She is alive. Sofia is alive. The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then the line went dead, because the man on the other end had already dropped the phone. What happened over the next 40 minutes was something Renzo Vitali would not be able to remember in any clear order for the rest of his life. He remembered grabbing his car keys without his coat. He remembered the engine of the black Maserati firing under his hand at a sound that was almost a roar. He remembered the gate of the estate flying open. He remembered the speedometer climbing past 110 on the open stretch of the Staten Island Expressway. He remembered running a red light at Highland Boulevard and not caring. He remembered the prayer he muttered under his breath the entire way. The same 3 words, over and over. Please let it be true. Please let it be true. Please let it be true. He pulled into the narrow driveway in Tottenville at exactly 6:52 in the morning. He did not bother to close the car door behind him. He took the steps of the porch in 2 strides. The front door opened from the inside. Franco stood there. He did not speak. He stepped aside, and in the warm dim of the front hallway, beside an old umbrella stand and a runner rug that smelled faintly of lavender, stood a small girl wrapped in a blanket too large for her body. Her hair was filthy and tangled. Her cheeks were hollow in a way that should never have been possible for a face he had kissed at breakfast 1,000 times. Her bare feet, sticking out from beneath the wool, were caked with dried blood and stained with the color of forest mud. She looked like a creature that had been dragged through hell and had refused to stay there. She lifted her face. Her dark eyes, his own eyes in a smaller frame, met his. Daddy. The word came out hoarse, almost a whisper, the voice of a child who had been screaming silently for 3 weeks. She ran. Renzo's knees buckled before his arms did. He went down onto the hardwood floor of an unfamiliar house in a borough he barely visited, and he opened his arms wide, and his daughter slammed into his chest with a force that knocked the air out of him. He folded around her. He folded the way a building folds when its foundation has finally been allowed to rest. He pressed his face into the crown of her tangled hair, into the smell of pine and sweat and survival that clung to her skin, and the most feared man in 5 boroughs began to sob. He sobbed without sound at first, and then with sound, deep and cracked and unashamed. His shoulders shook, tears ran down his face into her hair. His hands moved over her back, as if he needed to confirm with his own palms that every bone was still in place. My little girl, he whispered. The Italian came up from a place he had not let himself visit in years. My little girl, Daddy thought he had lost you. Daddy thought. He could not finish the sentence. He pressed his lips to her temple, again and again, as if each kiss were a stitch closing a wound. Sofia's small fingers gripped the lapels of his suit jacket, her face pressed into the side of his neck. She cried too, but quietly, the way a child cries when she has spent a long time deciding that crying is not something she is allowed to do. After a long, long time, she lifted her face just enough to speak. Daddy. Yes, princess. There is a bad man with silver hair. The other men called him the architect. He is the one who took me. Renzo's whole body went still around her, the way a deep ocean goes still in the seconds before a great wave begins to gather. But he did not let her go. He only tightened his arms and pressed his cheek to the top of her head and whispered into her hair, the only promise he had left to give. Then Daddy will find him, princess. Daddy will find him. An hour later, Sofia sat at the small kitchen table of the safe house in Tottenville, wrapped in a clean flannel shirt of Franco's that fell past her knees, her bare feet washed and bandaged by Rosa's careful hands. In front of her sat a bowl of pastina with butter and a piece of buttered toast. She had eaten half of the soup and all of the toast in the silent, focused way of a child who had recently relearned what hunger really meant. Renzo sat across from her with his hands folded on the wood, watching every spoonful as though it were holy. He did not interrupt. When she had finished, he reached across the table and laid his palm gently over her smaller one. "Tell me, princess, from the beginning. Take your time." Sophia took a breath that lifted her thin shoulders. And then, in the careful voice of a girl who had practiced telling this story to herself in the dark of a forest, she told him everything. The cabin in the woods with the iron bars on a window the size of a textbook, the big one who snored in the chair every night, the skinny one who smoked menthols and whose hands shook, the way she had counted their footsteps and learned their hours, the fever she had faked with a wet washcloth, the paperclip and the copper wire, the 7 minutes it had taken her to open the lock. Franco, leaning against the kitchen counter with his arms folded, made no sound. But the muscle in his jaw worked. She told them about the night the new car had come, about the smooth voice with the Eastern accent that had spoken in the hallway, the voice that had said the name. "The architect does not require the child to die yet. The architect requires Vitale to break first." Renzo's hand tightened around hers without his noticing. She told them about the dog and the bullet and the stream and the milk truck. And then, in the quietest voice of all, she told them about the gas station lot under the halogen lamps, and the black Mercedes with no plates, and the tall man with the silver hair and the steel eyes and the heavy fur collar, and Tony, her own cousin Tony, bowing his head almost to his own chest in a way that no Vitali man had ever bowed in front of anyone. When she was finished, she pulled the battered flip phone from the pocket of her sweatpants and slid it across the table to her father. "I took his picture, Daddy," through a hole in the truck door. Renzo did not trust his own hands. He flipped the phone open with the careful fingers of a man defusing something. He found the photograph. He stared at it for a long, long moment. Then he turned the screen toward Franco. The old family advisor crossed the room and took the phone from him. He brought it close to his face. He squinted at the small, grainy image under the kitchen light. The blood drained from his lined face the way wine drains from a tilted glass. "Madonna Santa," he whispered. He set the phone down on the table as if it had grown heavy. He moved fast for a man of 71. He carried his leather satchel to the table, pulled out a small black laptop, and opened a folder no normal investigator could have built. Files began to fly past on the screen. Names and faces Renzo did not recognize. Franco stopped on one of them and turned the laptop around. The same silver hair, the same lean carved face, the same steel eyes, 10 years younger but unmistakable. "His name," Franco said quietly, "is Cassius Kane." Renzo did not speak. "The Western press calls him a businessman with shipping interests in Rotterdam and Odessa. The Eastern press does not write about him at all. In our world, he has only one name, the architect. He earned it because he does not kill his enemies. Renzo. He builds traps for them. He does it patiently. He plants people in their houses and waits 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. He arranges their accidents. He rearranges their families. He breaks them in pieces so small that by the time they realize who has been doing it, they no longer have the strength to fight back." Renzo lifted his eyes from the photograph on the screen. "You know him. I know of him. Every old family advisor east of the Hudson knows of him. We have been told for 30 years that if his name ever shows up in our family, we are to leave the country before sunset. Your father told me that himself in 1988. Renzo went very still in his chair. The kitchen clock ticked. Somewhere in the back of the small house, Rosa's footsteps moved softly between rooms. Sophia, exhausted, had laid her cheek against the table and had begun to drift toward the edge of sleep, though her small hand did not let go of his. A memory rose up inside him. 3 years ago, a summer evening on a quiet stretch of road in Westchester, Elena, his first wife, the mother of the child whose hand he was now holding, driving herself home from a charity dinner in Greenwich because the regular driver had called in sick that night. A black SUV at a red light, 2 men, masked. A robbery, the police had ruled. They had taken her purse and her watch. They had left her dead behind the wheel. The case had gone nowhere. No witnesses, no fingerprints, no suspects. Renzo had grieved her. He had grieved her without ever asking the question that any honest Mafia boss should have asked at the time, because he had been a younger man and he had been in love, and he had wanted, more than anything, for her death to be exactly what the police said it was, a senseless tragedy, the kind that happened to other people too. His hand began to shake. He pressed it flat against the table to make it stop. "Franco." His voice was low and dry. 3 years ago. "Elena." Franco did not answer right away. When he did, the old man's eyes met Renzo's with a sorrow he had been carrying for a long time. "I have wondered, Figlio. I have wondered for a long time. I did not say anything to you because I had no proof. And a man does not throw a fresh widower's heart into a fire on suspicion alone. Renzo looked down at his sleeping daughter. He looked at the small, bandaged feet resting on the chair beside him. He looked at the face of his first wife in his memory, smiling at him over the rim of a wineglass at their last anniversary dinner. He understood, finally, the size of the thing he was inside. This was not a betrayal. A betrayal was a wound healed. This was a war that had begun on a summer road in Westchester 3 years ago, and possibly long before. A war that had buried his first wife, a war that had reached one 10-year-old hand into his cousin's pocket and another into his second wife's mailbox. A war that had built a fake grave for his daughter and laid a flower bracelet on top of it. A war the other side had been fighting for a decade while he had been pouring wine in his library and signing papers at his desk, and believing he was the most powerful man on the East Coast. He stood up slowly from the kitchen table. He bent forward and lifted his sleeping daughter into his arms. She mumbled something against his shoulder and tightened her small fist on his collar. "Franco," he said quietly, without looking at the old man. "Get every name, every shell company, every shipping route, every man on his payroll inside the city. I want to know what he eats for breakfast and where his daughter goes to school, if he has one." "Yes, Figlio." Renzo pressed his lips to Sophia's tangled hair and turned toward the staircase. "And Franco," he added, his voice as quiet as a knife being slid out of a sheath. "He has had 10 years. We will need 10 days. By noon of the same day, the small kitchen in Tottenville had become a war room. Franco's laptop sat at the head of the table beside 2 burner phones and a cup of black coffee gone cold. Rosa moved softly between the rooms upstairs, where Sophia was sleeping under 3 quilts. Renzo stood at the window, his hands folded behind his back, watching a neighbor across the street water her tomato plants in a backyard that knew nothing about any of this. When he turned, his face had become something carved. "We will not run him to ground all at once," he said quietly. "He has had a decade. He has men inside my house. The moment he understands that we know who he is, he will go silent, and he will go deep, and we will spend the rest of our lives waiting for the next bracelet on a grave." Franco looked up from the laptop. "Then we starve him out 1 limb at a time. 3 limbs, Renzo said. 3 cuts. We make all 3 at once, before the body has time to know any one of them is gone." He sat down at the head of the table. He laid 1 finger flat on the wood. "The first cut is Tony." Franco nodded. "He still believes I am grieving. He still believes the cabin in the woods is intact. He does not know the milk truck reached the Bronx. He does not know that you and I have looked at a photograph of his master." Renzo's eyes were very calm now, the calm of cold water under thick ice. "We feed him a single piece of bait that only he, and no one else, can swallow. We tell him a sighting has come in. A small girl at a diner in upstate New York, near the cabin. A waitress who thought she recognized the face from the news. We hand him the lead and we ask him, personally, to drive up to a warehouse in Red Hook tonight, where we will be waiting with the witness for him to question. He will go," Franco said. "He cannot afford not to." "He will go," Renzo agreed. "And he will arrive at a warehouse that does not contain any witness. It will contain me, and 12 captains who have eaten at my father's table, and an empty chair with his name on the back of it." He moved his finger to the next spot on the table. "The second cut is Isabella." He did not raise his voice on her name. He did not lower it either. He spoke of her the way a doctor speaks of a tumor that is connected to a vein the patient still needs. "She has been talking to a handler, a man who calls her on a burner phone at irregular hours. She has been doing it because that man owns a photograph of her son in Brookline and a list of his school's pickup hours." He paused. "She will continue to take those calls. She will continue to feed information. The information will now come from me. Every word in her mouth will be a word I have placed there. And while she speaks, Franco's people will trace the call. Every one. Until we have a tower, and an address, and a face." Franco lifted his coffee. "She knows we will be listening. She knows. She has agreed. It is the only way she keeps her son alive. And it is the only way I do not put her on a plane out of this country tonight." His jaw tightened on the last word. "She is not forgiven. She is borrowed. After this is done, we will see what is left of the marriage. But she is useful to me now, and that is enough." He moved his finger to the 3rd spot. "The 3rd cut is Cassius himself." The old family advisor closed the laptop slowly, as if doing so allowed him to focus better. "Newark," Renzo said. "Your network has been mapping his footprint for years. I want every container, every bonded warehouse, every shell company tied to his shipping fronts at the port. I want the building where he sits when he comes to this country. By the time Tony walks into our trap in Red Hook tonight, I want a second team already moving on Cassius Kane in New Jersey. The other side of his web cuts at the same hour, in the same minute, as the side we cut here. 2 cities. 1 clock. 1 clock. Franco let out a slow breath. It is the kind of strike your father would have admired. Figlio, my father trusted Tony for 10 years, Renzo said quietly. I am not sure my father is the standard I am measuring against today. He stood up. He walked to the small staircase and looked up toward the second floor, where the only thing on earth that still mattered to him was sleeping under 3 quilts. There is one more thing. Franco, the most important thing. Franco waited. While we are doing all of this, she does not stay in this house. Renzo turned back toward the table. She does not stay anywhere a single Vitali soldier has ever stepped foot. I want her at the cottage in Cold Spring Harbor, the one in my grandmother's name. No one knows it exists except you and me. I want 4 men there, not captains, not lieutenants, the 4 men who carried my father's casket. Diego, Salvatore, Paolo, and Marco Di Nardo. Old guard, the kind who remember what loyalty looked like before any of this rot crept in. And Maria? Maria comes too. The girl will not heal in a house full of strangers. She needs the woman who braided her hair when she was 3. Maria stays with her. Maria sleeps on a cot in the same room. The 4 men outside, around the clock. Done. Renzo climbed the stairs slowly. He pushed open the door of the small bedroom where Sophia slept. He sat down on the edge of the mattress. He brushed a strand of dark hair from his daughter's forehead with the back of one finger. She stirred. Her eyes opened a sleepy fraction. Daddy, I am here, princess. He bent down and pressed his forehead to hers. Listen to me. Daddy has work to do tonight. Important work. Maria is coming to take you to a quiet little house by the water. You will be safe there. 4 very good men will watch the doors. She nodded against his forehead, her small fingers tightening on the front of his shirt. He did not pull back. He held her there, eye to eye, for one long, deliberate breath. My Sophie, I let you out of my sight one time, 3 weeks ago. It will not happen again. Not tonight. Not next week. Not ever. Are we clear? Yes, Daddy. Good. His thumb brushed her cheek. Then close your eyes. Sleep. When you wake up, the world will already be a smaller place for the men who tried to take you. He watched her drift off, her thin chest rising and falling under the quilts. Then Lorenzo Vitali stood up, walked back down the stairs, and went to load a clean magazine into his father's old service pistol. Pier 11 in Red Hook had been a Vitali warehouse since the early 70s. Tonight it was empty of cargo. The forklifts had been wheeled to the far wall. The big sodium overhead lights had been switched off and replaced with 2 bare bulbs, one above the loading door and one above the small office in the back. The vast concrete floor stretched between them like a stage set just before a play. 12 men stood in a wide arc inside the shadows along the side walls. None of them moved. Each of them held a hand inside his own coat. Among them stood 2 men in their late 60s, captains who had served Renzo's father. Men whose word inside the family carried a weight no one would dare contest. Their presence had been deliberate. What was about to happen tonight needed witnesses with white hair. In the center of the floor, a single wooden chair faced the loading door. The chair was empty. Renzo stood 10 feet behind it, in shadow, his father's pistol holstered beneath his suit jacket. He did not pace. He did not check his watch. He listened. At 12 minutes past 9, the rolling steel door rattled up. Antonio Vitale stepped through alone, the way a man without anything to hide steps into a room he believes is his. He carried himself with his usual swagger, a charcoal coat over the same Savile Row suit. The collar of his white shirt open one button, hair freshly combed. He had even taken the time to splash on a little of the cologne his cousin's wife had once said she liked. Renzo? His voice rolled out across the concrete with the easy warmth of a brother arriving for dinner. I came as fast as I could. They said the witness was already here. Where is she? Where is the waitress? He walked into the soft pool of light cast by the bulb above the chair. He looked at the empty seat. He looked at the empty floor. He kept his easy smile fixed in place a moment too long. Renzo stepped out of the dark. Tony's smile did not drop right away. It thinned. It stretched. It tried to hold its shape. Cugino? He said. And now his voice carried the smallest crack in it. What is this? Renzo did not answer immediately. He walked a slow circle around his cousin. The other 12 men did not move from the walls, but the shape of their presence was something Tony could feel on his skin. When Renzo spoke at last, his voice was almost gentle, the way a man speaks to an old friend at the bedside of a long illness. 10 years, Tony. Tony's head jerked, just a fraction. His hand, which had been resting easy at his side, moved an inch closer to the inside of his coat. 10 years you have eaten at my table. 10 years you have stood at my right hand at every funeral and every christening. 10 years I have signed off on every promotion you asked me for, every shipping route you suggested. Renzo's circle around him narrowed by a step. 10 years, Tony. And every single one of those years, on the first day of every quarter, $200,000 went into a bank account in Prague under a name that is not yours. The color drained from Tony's face the way water drains from a punctured can. His right hand kept moving. The 12 men along the walls did not draw, but every single one of them shifted their weight forward. Tony's hand slid inside the coat. It came out fast, but Renzo's old guard had been watching Tony shoot in practice ranges since he was a teenager. They knew the way he twitched his shoulder before a draw. 3 muzzles flashed at once from the walls before Tony's pistol cleared his lapel, and the bullets did not find his chest. They found the wall behind his head, the floor beside his foot, the door frame 6 inches to his left. Warning shots, placed by men who had never missed a real shot in their lives. Tony froze with his arm half extended. His own pistol fell from his fingers and clattered onto the concrete. He did not raise his hands. He laughed instead. It was an ugly laugh, a laugh that had been waiting 10 years to come out of him. You think this changes anything, Renzo? You think putting me in this chair tonight saves you? He spat onto the concrete. Cassius Kane has been buying you from the inside for a decade. Half of Pier 7, half of Pier 9, half of every outbound shipping line your father thought he owned. He has notarized contracts in 3 countries. He has bankers in Zurich and judges in New Jersey. He will bury this entire family before the snow falls, and you, Cugino, will be the last Vitali standing in front of his daughter's grave when he is done. A long silence followed. Renzo did not strike him. He did not draw the pistol from his holster. He did not even raise his voice. He simply walked up to his cousin, looked into his eyes from a distance of less than a foot, and said the words that hurt more than any bullet. You are not worth a grave, Tony. Not yet. You are worth a chair, and a long night, and a very patient conversation. You are going to tell us everything. Every shipping route, every banker, every soldier on his payroll inside this city, every meeting place, every code phrase. By the time the sun comes up tomorrow, your master is going to wake up to find that you have built him a coffin out of your own mouth. Tony spat again. I will tell you nothing. Renzo smiled for the first time that night. It was not a kind smile. You will. Franco is on his way. He turned away. 2 of the older captains stepped forward and lifted Tony from his feet by the shoulders of his ruined coat. They walked him toward the small office at the back of the warehouse, where a single hard chair waited under the second bulb. While Tony was being dragged across the concrete, 2 cars on the other side of the city pulled into the front drive of a small, white-shuttered safe house in Bay Ridge. Inside that house, Isabella Vitali was already packed, a small leather suitcase by the door, her phone, freshly handed to one of Franco's electronics men, already cloned and tagged. She did not weep this time. She did not beg. She simply nodded at the men who came to escort her into protective custody. Men her husband had assigned, who would shield her from the silver-haired hand that was about to learn she had been turned. She was not a prisoner of the Vitale family. Not exactly. But she was no longer free either. She was a borrowed weapon, and she would remain borrowed until the man who had threatened her son lay dead or in chains. In Red Hook, the small office door closed behind Tony. In the silence that followed, Renzo lit a cigarette he did not intend to smoke and stared out across the empty warehouse floor. 2 cuts had been made tonight. The third was waiting for him at a pier in Newark. Newark Port at 3 a.m. was a ghost city of stacked containers and salt wind off the bay. Tony had broken at 1:15. A gray office building tucked behind a bonded customs lot had come spilling out of his mouth between sips of water. Renzo took 20 of the family's best soldiers and 3 SUVs over the Goethals Bridge into New Jersey. They cut the power to the building from the substation a block away. The gray office sat alone behind a chain-link fence, its windows still glowing with backup generator light. 2 armed men at the front door fell in silence. 2 more at a black sedan in the gravel lot fell second. The Vitali wedge moved up the central staircase. Renzo at the front, Franco 1 step behind. The old family advisor's pistol already drawn in a hand that had not lost any steadiness in 50 years. The door at the top of the stairs stood open. A long room ran the width of the building. A heavy walnut desk faced a wall of tinted glass. Behind the desk, in a leather wingback chair, sat a man with silver hair and a crystal glass of dark liquor in his hand. Cassius Kane tilted the glass in a small mocking salute. Lorenzo Vitale, at last. 4 bodyguards stood around him, None of them moved yet. Why? Renzo said. It was the only word he allowed himself. You do not know. Of course you do not know. Your father never told you. Cassius set the glass down. Vienna, autumn of 1998. Your father and 3 of his captains shot a man named Andre Kane through the throat. Andre was 23 years old. He was finishing a doctorate. He was visiting me on holiday because he was my younger brother. Renzo's breath stayed even. I decided then, Lorenzo, that I would not kill the man who killed my brother. I would build a small, clean machine inside his house and let it run for a decade, and then one day I would let him watch his world come apart in his hands while he was too tired to stop me. And after he was buried, I would let his son watch it happen all over again. My first wife, Renzo said. Greenwich, 3 years ago. My daughter. A bracelet. A bouquet. A grave. My cousin. A cheap man. The easiest to keep on a long leash. Cassius's right hand drifted very slowly beneath the edge of the desk. The 4 bodyguards moved first. The room exploded. Muzzle flashes lit the dark glass behind the desk. A Vitali soldier on Renzo's left went down. Another took a round in the shoulder and kept firing through it. The Cassius men were larger and better paid, but they had been trained on a discipline that came from fear, and the Vitali men had been trained on a discipline that came from 100 years of family. The first bodyguard fell to 2 shots from Renzo's father's old pistol. The second fell to the soldier behind him. The third was cut down by Franco before his finger reached the trigger. The fourth tried to reach for the desk drawer and never made it. The room went quiet so suddenly that the hum of the generator became audible again. Cassius was still in his chair. His right hand had cleared the desk. The small black pistol he had hidden beneath it was halfway up. His steel eyes lifted across the smoke at Renzo with the calm of a man who believed he was about to fire one final shot. A single crack echoed from behind Renzo's shoulder. Cassius's hand jerked. The pistol fell. 2 small dark holes opened on his shirt, and the silver-haired man slumped slowly forward across his own desk like a great tree finally agreeing to fall. Renzo turned. Franco stood with his old service piece raised in both hands, smoke curling from the muzzle. The old family advisor's face was wet, but not from sweat. For Elena, he said quietly. For Sophia. And for your father, Filio. He lowered the gun. Cassius Kane did not move again. 1 week later, Calvary Cemetery looked nothing like the place Renzo Vitali had knelt in 3 weeks earlier. The sky was a clean, bright blue. The grass had dried out from the recent rains and turned a soft autumn gold. A warm October sun lay across the rows of headstones like a slow, gentle hand. Somewhere among the trees at the edge of the property, a sparrow was singing an ordinary morning song that did not understand it had ever been a sad day in this place. Renzo and his daughter walked side by side up the gravel path. He wore a charcoal coat without a tie. She wore a yellow cotton dress almost identical to the one she had been wearing the morning of the explosion, because Maria had searched 3 closets to find it. A pair of small white sneakers covered the bandages still on her feet. Her dark hair, washed and combed and rebraided every morning of the past 7 days, hung in 2 neat ribbons over her shoulders. Her cheeks had a little color in them again. She had eaten 3 full meals every day for a week. They stopped in front of the grave. The stone still stood there, exactly as it had on the day of the rain. The carved letters still spelled her name. Beloved daughter, 7 years young. The wilted white roses Renzo had crushed in his fist 3 weeks ago had been cleared away by the cemetery groundskeeper. Sophia looked up at her father. Daddy, can we take it down? I do not want my name to be lying under the ground while I am still standing on top of it. Renzo looked into her dark eyes for a long moment. He did not answer her with words. He nodded once. He stepped forward. He laid both palms flat against the cold marble. Sophia stepped up beside him and laid her own small hands beside his. Her fingers spread wide on the stone. They pushed together. The marker was heavier than it looked, but a man whose body had been carrying 20 years of buried weight had no trouble shifting it tonight. The headstone tipped, leaned, and crashed onto the grass. The marble cracked clean in 2 pieces along the line where her name had been carved. Sophia stared down at the broken halves of her own grave for a moment, and then, slowly, she smiled. It was the first real smile he had seen on her face since the morning of the strawberries. Renzo crouched down beside her and took both of her small hands in his. Listen to me. Princess, there is one more thing I have to tell you, and I will only ever say it once. The man with the silver hair is gone. Your cousin Tony will never sit at our table again. But that man had a network. He had people in cities I have never been to. Some of them may still be out there. Some of them may decide one day that they want to finish what he started. Sophia's small fingers tightened on his. I am telling you this because I will not lie to you. Not anymore. From this day forward, your father is never going to take his eyes off you. Not for a single hour. Not for a single morning. Are we clear? She tilted her chin up. Her eyes, which had counted footsteps in the dark and faked fevers and unlocked iron doors and crawled into the wind to lose a hunting dog, met his without a flicker. I am not afraid anymore, Daddy. Because you taught me how. Renzo did not have a single word ready for that answer. He simply pulled his daughter into his arms and held her there, in the warm autumn sun, on the grass of a cemetery that was no longer hers. They walked out together a few minutes later. Her small hand fit inside his the way it always had. At the far end of the cemetery road, parked beneath a row of old elms, a black sedan with no license plate sat with its engine running, 2 figures inside. The driver did not get out. He simply watched as the father and daughter walked back to their own car. And then, when they had gone, he eased into traffic and disappeared the other way. The war was not entirely over, but this time, the Vitali family was ready. This story leaves us with a lesson worth carrying. The deepest love in this world is the love between a parent and a child, and that love has the power to survive things no army could survive. It teaches us that the people we trust most can sometimes be the ones who hurt us, and the truest loyalty often comes from those who never asked for the spotlight. It reminds us that even the smallest, gentlest soul can find unimaginable courage when the people they love are in danger. And above all, it teaches us that no matter how dark the night becomes, a new sunrise is always waiting on the other side of it for those who refuse to give up. If this story moved you, please give it a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you do not miss our new emotional stories every day. We would love to hear from you. Did this story remind you of someone in your own life? Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone you trusted? Or have you ever had to find the strength to start your life over again? Share your thoughts and your stories in the comments below. Every comment you leave is a voice we read with our whole heart, and your words may comfort someone else who is reading at the very same moment. To everyone watching this video right now, we wish you good health, a peaceful life, and many happy days surrounded by the people you love most. Remember, no matter how heavy the rain gets, the sun is always learning your name and waiting to come back for you. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. Goodbye for now, and we will see you again in the next video.